You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
The Sons of the Shoe rides again. Nick Wilson, Spencer German with you. Hey there, hi there, ho there. Once again, the giving tree that is Buckeyes football continues to give us the latest in awesome news, interesting news. We've got a continued reaction on the Ross Bjork hire in what seems to be some, in no way seller's remorse from the A&M community. We've got to get into portal madness, which could deliver the Buckeyes the final or the one or two final pieces to a very strong offseason. And yet, Spencer German, today, as we gather together in the hallowed halls of wherever the F you are and where the F I am, it is the unthinkable, the thing that we thought, and you and I talked about off air, like, when do we have the should Ryan Day give up play calling conversation? And a lot of our reticence to already have this podcast in hand, this version of this conversation was, well, let's see what he does on his coaching staff. And it kind of was a slow trickle, right? You got the safeties coach move. Then you got the special teams coach move. Then there was the Corey Dennis move. And then last night, and I remember texting you, I was like, hey, there's some scuttlebutt out there that the new OC could be announced tomorrow morning. And I was like, I was in this crisis of, when do we tape the podcast? Because I want to make sure we get this news in, and the football gods were kind to us again. Last night it came out, Bill O'Brien, former Penn State head coach, former, Houston Texans head coach, Bama OC, New England Patriots OC, is the next OC of the Ohio State Buckeyes.
Yeah, I guess I'll start by saying we have been – I mean, I don't know. Like, maybe Michigan needs to win a national championship more often so that we get all this. We get Ohio State just going all in, balls to the wall. Let's get this thing figured out. Because we have been given like a gold mine of news since Ohio State season has ended, but also in the last week, since obviously week plus now, that Michigan's won a national championship because they understand the assignment, right? Like, Ryan Day knows he has to beat that team next year, and he's got to be competing for national championships. And to see this all kind of come into fruition and play out the way it has, with so much just news and movement and changes, it's been great for us to talk about. But yeah, I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. It's been awesome to have so much to talk about. And our latest one is this Bill O'Brien hire. What's interesting to me about all this is that I think you and I feel pretty level-headed about this. And I was actually on the airwaves on 92 Through the Fan when this news came down. So I had a chance to kind of react in real time. And I go to break, and my board up at the time, I'll give Jax a shout out. Jax was my board up. He was like, Spencer, you might be the only person who seems like even remotely happy about this. Like, on social media, people are just replying to Pete Thamel's tweet about this hire, saying the guy sucks. There was the tweet about that I saw some people sharing that he never won a national championship with Nick Saban, and in a couple of years he's been with him. And he never won a Super Bowl when he was working with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady in New England, and all these different things about how his offense is bad and archaic and blah, 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 blah. And I just sit there and I'm like, well, first of all, maybe the most ironic thing about all this, Nick, is that in Cleveland, we're having conversations right now about Kevin Stefanski and his new OC and who's going to take on the play calling duties. And I know Ohio State fans don't necessarily care about this, but what's funny is I was literally seeing people on social media tweeting about how, Bill O'Brien would be a great OC in Cleveland because he's worked with Deshaun Watson and he got a lot out of Deshaun Watson. They should maybe hire him. So this maybe only applies to Cleveland, Ohio State fans, which there are a good number of. So that's fair. And I think a lot of them probably listen to the show because we're a Cleveland-based station. But he's good enough to be the offensive coordinator on your pro football team, but he's not good enough to be the offensive coordinator on your college team. I don't understand the math there. Like, now all of a sudden you hate it because it's Ohio State versus the Browns. That I don't understand. Like, make it make sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand honestly, it is the amount of negative reception to this. I actually did when I saw Bill O'Brien, and the message boards had kind of been linking Bill O'Brien to this opening for longer than almost anybody. And the other names that we thought were in the running were Toledo head coach Jason Candle. He was in the running for the Miami OC job a couple years ago. He's been in the running for a few different offensive coordinator gigs, but has not pulled the trigger. It was Liam Cohen, the OC at Kentucky, that has Sean McVay ties back to the LA Rams, and then it was, who am I forgetting? There's one very obvious guy that I just am not. But there was a third candidate. But
I remember those three vivid. Those are the three I remember the most. I'm trying to think who the other one was.
But Bill O'Brien was kind of the guy that had been around, and so I knew, like, just based off message boards and everything, I kind of knew that it wasn't going to be a universally beloved hire. But I'm a little caught off guard at the extent of it. Some of the initial reactions were, well, is he really an upgrade over Ryan Day as a play caller? Why not Brian Hartline? Are you going to lose Brian Hartline? Oh, well, but he didn't win this, or he was forced out of Tuscaloosa by Nick Saban, or look at what the Patriots offense was last year. And by the way, there's some validity to a lot of these conversations. Here's what I think Buckeyes fans are missing, though, Spencer, which is the number one takeaway is I don't think that Bill O'Brien comes to Columbus without getting play calling duties.
No chance.
And I think, it's so funny because, like, I kind of look at Ryan Day and Kevin Stefanski in a similar light as two youngish. They're not. They're getting a little older, but they're youngish offensive guys. They're really, really bright. And what got them hired was their ability to scheme up an offense and to make, have these explosive offenses that score an ass load of points and all this stuff. But as you get deeper into being a head coach, all of a sudden, especially in college football, other things start to take precedence when you're the head coach. And you can't just sit back and scheme up everything and draw up all the plays and do all that stuff. And it doesn't mean he's not good at it, although there's some evidence that he might not be as good as we thought he was when he was Urban's OC. But, like, it doesn't mean that he's not good at it. What it means is that there's only 24 hours in a day. And no, he could be the single greatest play caller in the history of play callers. If that took away from him being a good head coach, or if that made him 10% less of a good head coach because he was too busy thinking about play calling in the middle of a game, then there's no amount. There's no amount of greatness as a play caller that would substantiate costing him as a head coach. And I think this season, or this offseason, has been about removing any doubt and giving himself the perfect opportunity to be in the best position to springboard this next year from what some people look as a win or die year, and turning this into, let's build the thing let's build the bedrock of what this thing's going to be built on for the next decade. And so I look at this as a good moment for Ryan Day, whether he was told to do this or not, because I think that's a fair point. He could have been instructed, all right, it's time you make these changes. We don't know. But for him to make this change, I think is a positive sign. And I think going to a guy who has experience, who's coached in big games, who's been honestly, the guy won a butt ton of games as a head coach in Houston, which ain't easy. And as a guy who has been at the right-hand man of both Nick Saban and Bill Belichick, who has wide experience, like in all these sort of schemes, who in Houston ran Clemson plays, despite that not being anything close to what he ran in the NFL or at Penn State. Like, I don't know what more you could ask for out of this hire. And it all starts with the fact that Ryan Day now gets to be more of a CEO as a head coach, and somebody he's got there he can now trust to go ahead and actually do the heavy lifting. And I don't know how you can look at this as an awful hire or an embarrassing hire or anything like that.
I mean, I think from an experience standpoint, he's got what you're looking for. He's worked with two of the greatest coaches of all time, best ever in the NFL, best ever at the college level. I mean, that speaks for itself. I I think if you have worries about his offense, like I guess I understand that to an extent. And there were some issues when he was at Bama. People said the offense wasn't quite as prolific. But I go back and I look up the numbers and like, guys, they put up 40 points the 1 year per game, made the college football playoff. They made the championship game and they lost to Georgia, who they had to play twice that year. And they beat them the first time pretty substantially. And then the second time, Georgia just played a better game and they got the better of them in the championship game. But again, it's a conference opponent. It's a team that knows you, and you ended up meeting them again and they got you. And then the second year was not this past season, the season before, where they got the 2 losses. They lost to Tennessee. And who was their other? I forget off the top of my head what their other loss was, but they don't make the playoff. And like, yeah, like that's a disappointing season by Alabama standards. And Nick Saban did the thing Nick Saban does, which is, okay, I think it's time to move on. And we're going to get you a promotion as our way of almost firing you. Right. He always finds a way to like find a soft landing for his assistants that he brings on, but he still was good enough at one point to go work with Nick Saban. And I think that's, to me, like if you're looking for Ryan Day to change his philosophy and change his mindset, and by the way, Nick Saban now exits stage left, there's an opportunity here to take the reins of the college football game and make it yours and be the team that's like dominating the NIL era if you do it right. And it sounds like they've got their money in order and they're starting to really bring people in and keep people around, and they're throwing money left and right. So that part's kind of taken care of itself after the Michigan championship run. And now it's up to Ryan Day to sort of pull the right strings and make the right decisions. And to me, like this feels like a Nick Saban decision, not just because he worked for Nick Saban, but I'm envisioning this as being like, okay, Bill O'Brien's probably here for a couple years. Maybe he gets promoted and gets an NFL job or something else and finds himself back there, or he gets a head coaching job at some point. Who knows? But it opens the door for you to then find a new OC later. And the big thing for me, which you bring up, is that he's finally conceded, like, I'm okay giving this thing up. I'm okay giving up the play calling for the betterment of the team and making sure that I'm focusing on the right things so that we can win football games and we can be a national championship contender. It doesn't mean he doesn't have any say in the offense. I'm sure he's still going to collaborate on things and have some things to say and some things to contribute. But I like, and maybe now he can focus more on those 4th down decisions and he's being more aggressive. I don't know what this frees him up to do wholly. But I think, like, I guess I understand some of the complaints and gripes about Bill O'Brien. If you want to point out that he's ringless or whatever, fine. But I think at face value, I don't have an issue with this. And it feels like the type of move that is positioning yourself to have the right people in power to call the shots and move this team in the right direction. Like a lot of the stuff that we've seen play out since the offseason began has been as well.
Ryan Day was ringless when he was hired as the head coach. Tom Herman was ringless when he came over from Iowa State with Urban. Jim Tressel had not won a major championship as a D1 head coach. I know he'd won a Youngstown State, but like, I just think there's this obsession with gold now. And honestly, he was the offensive coordinator for one season.
And what was going to happen if they brought Jason Candle?
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, Liam Cohen. Okay. Joe Brady was the other name, by the way, which would have been a sexy name. Guys, with what's going on in Buffalo, Joe Brady might be either the next head coach in Buffalo or a head coaching candidate again, because that's kind of saved his profile. But getting back to this, to me, there's a clear upside and there's a downside to Bill O'Brien beyond a lot of the things we've mentioned. The upside is he's an outsider. And I think coaches are so comfortable in the what I know that it can be tough. You almost get into a rut, right? And especially in college football, where college football towns are fiefdoms, where you're very, very rarely challenged the way you are by the media in like an NFL market. And Urban found that out real quick. Like Jacksonville as a media market is very soft comparatively to the other 31 markets in the NFL. But what it does have is it's a bigger pipeline to the national consciousness than maybe the little ebbs and flows that happen on a daily basis in like a college town. And so what I mean to say is it's really easy to get into the groupthink. And so anytime you bring somebody out who isn't part of your tree, who is new, there's real, like, you can really grow from that. You know, I mean, that's Kevin Stefanski bringing in Jim Schwartz, right? Here's a guy, don't have a relationship. Now I'm bringing him in. Let's see what bears fruit here. And it doesn't always go right, but I do think there's an advantage to if you can allow yourself to give that person space and to their experience to grow you and your experience to grow them. Like, that can be a real positive thing for both sides here. And now the downside with all this being said is Bill O'Brien's reputation as a human being ain't great. And what I mean I
don't know if you watched that Tom Brady, the documentary he did, like when he first retired or whatever. That it was like they did like 7 episodes based on all I guess they did 10 episodes based on all his trips to the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. And they had, what was the nickname? Bill O'Brien had a nickname. I think it was like something like pot, like a pot, because it would explode. Because they just said he like runs hot all the time and he's like always in people's faces and he's like very combative. So yeah, I think you're onto something there with like how he fits with that dynamic. But we've also seen him. I would imagine if he's had success at the college level and the NFL level, I think he probably knows how to sort of settle into either of those worlds to make it work and connect with the players at each level respectively. No, well, I would imagine he has to have some sort of consciousness of what's going on around him where he can kind of dial that back or not when based on where he's coaching.
And I just I said complications as a person. So he's just can be a little bit of a difficult personality.
By the way, it was the teapot. The teapot is what they call it.
Teapot. Well, real quick, because I made it sound like he was an awful person.
Oh, no.
I meant more of a in case somebody saw this, I don't want to make it seem like he's a bad man. He just can be a little difficult. So I just want to make clear on that, because anytime you talk about somebody personally that you don't know, I'd like to kind of draw a firm distinction there. And the other part of this is the Heartline thing. And I'll be honest with you. One, Brian could have been a head coach yesterday if he wanted to be. And so people worrying that this could lose you Brian Hartline, I think there's always that risk when you bring somebody new into the staff. I mean, if Hartline and O'Brien don't get along, you never know. I mean, Vrabel and Urban didn't get along. And that is why Mike Vrabel went to the NFL back in 2013, 2 years before he won the national title with Urban. Now, what I would say is I think that I would be pretty surprised with Brian, who does not have a lot of play calling experience, if Ryan didn't already have a conversation hey, you're still my guy. You're still the future of this program. I'm going to bring somebody in, and I want you to kind of, get firsthand experience with him. And at some point in a later date, you'll be that guy. I'd be really shocked if there wasn't 3 or 4 conversations leading up to this.
You took the words right out of my mouth, because this is where I want to go next to 100%. I saw people freaking out, outraged. Oh, how could you do this to Brian Hartline? He's supposed to be the next guy. And I think we've been pretty level-headed on the show about Hartline and his future. And there's a chance that he is the future of this program, maybe as a head coach, maybe in that next phase of that is probably offensive coordinator. But if you are naive enough to think that Ryan Day just went to bed and woke up yesterday and decided, you know what, I'm just going to hire Bill O'Brien on a whim. I'm not going to tell a soul. I'm just going to call him up and say, hey, you want to come be our offensive coordinator? And then I'll smooth things over later. This has been going on.
And then when
when
Hartline found out about it, Ryan Day mushed him. He pushed his hand to his face and Heisman'd him.
Get out of here, former OC.
Shut up, nerd.
OC by name only. We don't care about what you have to say. No.
You only played in the NFL for 10 years, you dick.
If you don't think there was conversations had in that building about, hey, this is what we want to do. This is the direction that we want to go. And I'm sure that Brian Hartline was probably in some of these conversations about potential candidates and hearing the names that were floated out there. I would have guessed. And if I'm wrong, I'll own it one day. If we hear in a day from now that Brian Hartline's pissed and he's looking for a new school to go to and all these receivers he's going to bring with him or whatever, then fine. We'll have to own that. But I would be stunned, absolutely floored, if they didn't have some type of conversation where Brian Hartline was looped in with the understanding, like you alluded to, that, hey, we want you here. We want you to be the future of this program. Let's bring in a guy like Bill O'Brien, who's got veteran play calling experience. You can pick his brain. You can learn the way he ticks, what has worked for him. And then that hopefully paves the way for you to take on that role here down the line and build your resume and build your brand and build your eventual college coach platform. So I thought that was a completely moot point. If you're sitting here saying like, this is terrible for Brian Hartline, I can't believe they did him dirty like this, I think that you're not really seeing, I think you're guilty of not seeing the forest through the trees here. Like, I think you're just naive and you don't understand how these things work, because this wasn't just an out of whim decision. And it wasn't like Ryan Day called up Nick Saban and said, hey, congratulations on the retirement. Who do you think I should hire for offensive coordinator? Oh, this guy. Okay, I'll just hire him without telling my staff. Like, they talked about it. They had to.
Well, and I think this is like a way ancillary part of the picture. I also think one of the things that allowed Saban's legend to grow over time was how he was able to rehabilitate coaches. And you mentioned the magical impact where they'd be like, okay, you've done your 2 years now. We're going to release you to New England, and here's $1 million bonus, right? Like that you're going to get a raise and a better job. And I think
real quick, think of all the coaches that Nick Saban has like rehab their image.
Yeah.
Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian. People thought Steve Sarkisian would never coach again. Now he's that man at Texas. Like he has revived. Brian Dable's trajectory to being a head coach in the NFL started with Saban because he led them to a national championship with Tua, and then he goes to Buffalo, and then he goes to New York. Like it's crazy how often that happened. And if Ryan Day can maybe start doing something similar, like that's a feather in his cap.
Well, and here's the thing. Another guy that is Brian Dable, the Giants head coach, Maryland's head coach.
Did you not hear what did I break up?
Oh, did you say Brian Dable?
I said Brian
Dable,
God. Too. Did it not?
I had a Justin Fox moment. No, that was on me.
Okay. I thought you didn't hear me.
But no, I mean, so my point is, like, I do think, speaking of forgetting shit, I do think like it's almost incalculable how many coaches that Saban rehabilitated.
Yeah.
And I think if you're Ryan Day, like, you don't really have a coaching tree yet. You're what, 4 years into this? Jim Knowles did interview for the Duke job, and there was some scuttlebutt that he might get that. I think as you start to kind of, try and plant some things over the next couple of years, I do think having kind of this souped up coaching staff, which over time you're going to start to lose. And guys, I think that's only going to help you develop coaches below them, and I just think you're to a point where you're 4 years in. And I know you had turnover with the defensive side of the ball, and you've had a little turnover here, a little turnover there, but this is really the time to say, all right, where are we good? Where do we need help? And I think what's interesting with Bill O'Brien is, where does this lead from here, right? What does it mean? Are there more changes? I would assume that Bill O'Brien's going to be the OC and quarterbacks coach. That's an assumption. But, Alabama's 2024 quarterback, the kid, Julian, I'm going to butcher his last name, Sayin. He's in the portal already. There's a rumor that he could be coming to Columbus because of that relationship. But it makes you wonder, like, are they going to have a conversation about Justin Fry, depending on how they feel about the offensive line? When you bring in a new offensive coordinator and somebody who's going to have this much control over one side of the ball, it does make you wonder if there are other changes that could be coming down, or whether this is the big change. And I don't have any knowledge, but I just think it's really interesting with them. They already replaced the safeties coach. They're already looking for a special teams coach. How much more changes does this lead to on the offensive side of the ball?
Yeah, it's a good thought. And I just don't. I don't know. I can't sit here and act like this is end of the world stuff here from Ryan Day and this team, and add it to the list of things that they've completely screwed up and botched. And I also think too, I mean, I don't know, maybe we try to give Ryan Day too much credit on the show at times, but I do think on some level, as we sit back and evaluate everything that's transpired since the regular season ended and since the bowl season ended and they lost to Missouri, like a couple weeks ago, people were still panicking because they had 11 guys in the transfer portal or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And, what's going to happen? Is this the end of Ohio State? Are they losing their touch? And they've added a number of guys in the transfer portal with more potentially coming. Yep. They've beefed up the coaching staff. They have they have a top 2 to 3 recruiting class in the country since signing day. Like, everything has gone, other than Michigan going on to win the national championship, everything has gone relatively good for them to a point where we're having conversations like we had in the last episode about, is this a championship or bust season? So I at least can admire the fact that Ryan Day is not just being like, he's not, I'm sure he has an ego. Anybody who's made it to that level of coaching obviously does. But he's not just sticking in his ego in his mind of saying, I have all the answers, I'm going to do it my way. For him to be malleable and accept change and be willing to do some of these things and make some of these tough calls, I think speaks a lot to him understanding the message from fans, from boosters, from everybody. Like, he knows what has to happen. He knows that this team has to start winning. They have to start beating Michigan. They have to be in that national championship picture. And he's doing everything in his power to do that. So to me, at face value, like, that's maybe what the Bill O'Brien hire means even more so, is just another decision by Ryan Day that's pointing to, I'm all in on this. I get what you're telling me, and I'm trying to make sure that I deliver what you're looking for.
So I actually think you're heading in a really fun direction, and I actually want to continue with it because I think there's a question we can get to big picture about what has transpired in Columbus. And I also think that's going to lead us into a conversation about what is to come in Columbus, or more likely, who is to come in Columbus. That's next. But first, a quick word from our sponsors.